Chapter 2 of Vox Populi, written by Aelwyn, read by FarenenBlitz. Déjà vu, except I've never been here before. The last time Desmond had been in a coma, he'd woken up to the end of the world. This time was different. He'd expected to go softly into the quiet night, not wake up in a prep school prison. Literally. Abstergo was like the private school of correctional facilities. At least, this place was. He'd been told he was somewhere in Spain, but apart from that, he actually had no idea where he was. Oh, and that he'd been asleep for the last 3 years. 3 dreamless, ancestor-free, blissful utopian years. He hadn't died in the temple then. That was both a relief and a source of great frustration. He'd been ready to die for something he believed in, and instead he was held captive by Templars once again. Dr. Sophia and Alan Rickon, a father and daughter team, had been working on eliminating aggression in their subjects. People, Desmond soon realized, that all had exactly one thing in common. They were all assassins. Apparently his coma hadn't been a result of his interacting with the temple. They'd medically induced it so that his body could focus on healing. And after 5 operations and countless skin grafts, each amounting to something a CEO would probably think twice about paying, they'd managed to get his hand back to 87% of its former strength and usefulness. That was nothing to sneeze at. The pictures he'd seen made him wonder if a miracle sent by Providence had done the surgery. Instead of black skin charred to the 2nd and 3rd layer, deep red lines of circuitry-looking lightning burns, he had a slightly tanner shade of skin on the majority of his hand. It was visually and sensually rougher than the skin on his other hand. The electrical burn pattern had scarred despite their best efforts into precise white tissue, making it look like a white ink tattoo. It was kind of awesome looking, actually. Desmond had quickly grown fond of it. As for the strength in it, well, the hand was still useful, and he only got minor tremors in it occasionally. With therapy exercises, it had the chance of getting into the 95% range of former operability and a total elimination of the tremors. People could say what they wanted to about Abstergo, but when it came to breakthrough innovative technology and techniques, no one was better. Naturally, the result of being a centuries-old secret organization bent on running the world and containing some of the most brilliant minds and deepest pockets in the ranks of their order. At any rate, they'd also put him into a partial animus that controlled muscle function. In effect, they kept him moving, very slightly, by giving constant signals with the software to his brain so that his muscles didn't atrophy completely, and his brain didn't forget how to work them. All the same, it was 2 weeks of being conscious before he was able to get out of the bed, and 5 before they let him walk from it to the bathroom unaccompanied. He'd been told that it would take a few months of therapy and constant physical activity to regain full control of his muscle groupings. In fact, it seemed that the only thing Abstergo hadn't done was to give him a proper shave and haircut. They'd given him a trim, sure, but nothing as short as he would have liked. Desmond had tripped over himself by backpedaling too fast when he'd first seen his reflection in the mirror. With a short beard and shoulder-length hair that he'd annoyedly tied back in a ponytail until it could be cut, he'd thought that Ezio had been staring back at him. Except that Ezio had never been so pale and malnourished from being in a coma for a little less than 3 years. Dr. Sophia Rickon, on being notified of his apparent distress, had come in to calm him. Desmond actually liked her, in a guilty sort of way. Of course, she was the enemy, she was Templar, but she was also soft-spoken and honest. There was a great shortage of people like that in the world today. Which was early September of 2015. Still getting used to that. Apparently, there were no hoverboards. For the first 13 weeks after waking up, Desmond was completely isolated from the rest of the complex. It felt like being trapped in that skyrise level in Italy all over again. Except, no Lucy to tell him it was okay, and no Warren Vidic staring at him 3 inches away from his face when he woke in the morning with a serial killer smile. There were obviously pluses and minuses there. When he had got somewhat back on his feet, they moved him out of critical care and into Gen Pop. They didn't call it that, but they might as well have. For starters, everyone was stuck wearing the same sky blue pant and cream t-shirt set with soft, noiseless white shoes to keep up the appearance of a psych facility. They had cells they slept in, no sharing, but Desmond knew a double-sided mirror when he saw one, and knew that there was absolutely no privacy in the slightest. After the time in Italy and New York, where he'd had a bathroom with a camera in it, and then had been forced to sleep and dress in the same place as a few ladies and two very self-conscious guys, Sean had screamed bloody murder when Desmond walked in on him changing, Rebecca had no shame, Lucy had blushed profusely whenever she saw him with his shirt off, which was a little too often to be coincidental, and his father had been unusually keen on not showing skin above the wrist or below the collarbone. He was used to the complete and total lack of privacy. The complex itself was a state of the art, but Desmond was still confused at the logic, which had made someone think it was even a remotely good idea to trap a bunch of assassins in one large building and store weapons collected from their ancestors in the exact same place. Truly brilliant thinking on the part of the security team. Stellar. A+, 10 out of 10. But anyway, Gen Pop. They transferred him in the dead of night so as to not cause any problems. After all, if everyone was locked away to sleep, then there would be no one to witness his being moved from crit care. For some reason, a very good reason it seemed, they didn't want everyone and their brother to know about that. Apparently, having the kind of care done on you that Desmond had wasn't standard procedure, so it would mark him as a very important person. Being perfectly honest with himself, Desmond was unsure why they'd gone to the time and expensive, very expensive trouble to get him back on his feet. It meant they needed him for something, which didn't bode well. It wasn't his memories anymore. They'd extracted enough biological material to create a Sample 17 project. Subject 17 was no more. To the world, he was dead. They'd given him a new number the year. He was now Subject 46. They had no listed names in their records. It made it clean and tidy when the assassins came knocking. In Gen Pop, he would be expected to continue with his exercises and therapies to get back on his feet. That would continue until the doctors were convinced he was fully recovered. Or recovered as best as he could be when it came to his right hand. Again, the effort they were making was astounding, and Desmond dreaded the day they would make it good on whatever it was they had in mind for him. In fact, he was hoping to escape long before then. Even if they weren't after his blood, he was still an extremely important person to be holding. His dad was the current leader of the Assassin Brotherhood, for one thing. For another, due to his genes, he was one of the few people on the planet that was capable of interacting successfully with the pieces of Eden. And lastly, at least in Desmond's mind, he had a relationship of sorts going with Juno, even if it was hostile. Sophia had mentioned in passing to the head of security that they were still having problems rooting her out of Abstergo's network. She'd said it quietly, of course, but Desmond had trained with 3 master assassins who all knew how to hardcore eavesdrop. At any rate, he was definitely more valuable to them alive than dead. And that worried him. It worried him a lot.